Can I get a show of hands of people who enjoy answering random surveys before a talk starts? So now we know that. Great. So my name's Allison McNeil. I'm a technical writer and systems analyst. I'm Canadian, actually, originally, but I've been living in Iceland for the last 20 years. Really happy to be here. I came here last year and started writing this talk, actually, while I was sitting in the crowd. So I was really happy to be invited. I'm not used to so much sun, though. I got a little bit sunburned the last few days. It's 7 degrees in Iceland right now, and it's probably raining and might even snow later. So the topic of my talk today is documenting known unknowns. And it's about how to document things that we are aware that someone in our organization knows about, but we don't understand ourselves, and how to approach the subject like this, and that we don't have any prior background in. So famously, Plato said that Socrates said this, that I know nothing. And it's the thing that Operation Ivy, there was a punk band many years ago who rephrased it as, all I know is that I don't know nothing, which will set everybody's teeth on edge here, I'm sure. It's that point in the learning curve where you say, oh, I don't know anything, right before you kind of like climb the steep wall and come to a place of understanding. Known unknowns were something that were, if you remember, around 2003 when they were looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and Donald Rumsfeld had this famous press conference where he was talking about the evidence that was linking the government of Iraq to WMDs. And he was talking about how there are things that we know, there are known knowns, there are unknown knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. And everybody afterwards was just like, okay, this guy is just totally screwing with us. But the point is that unknown knowns and known unknowns are things that will actually shape our history quite a lot. And I wanted to talk about this concept. Is anybody familiar with this? The Johari Window? I got one. Excellent. So I'm going to teach you something today. It's an analysis technique that was developed in the 1950s by two American psychologists, Harry Ingham and Joseph Luft, whose pictures should actually be the other way around because they named it Joe and Harry, Johari. Make a mental note to change that later. So the technique is used frequently in project management and business strategy. And simply put, the main purpose of the exercise is that you're given a list of adjectives when it's used as a behavioral analysis technique. You take the adjectives and you pick the ones that you think apply to yourself, and then the same adjectives are given to your peers, and they pick the ones that they think apply to you. And this is all put into the Johari window. So the things up where the sunshine is, these are the things that, the adjectives that you picked and the other people picked. And then the ones that you pick that no one else picked, those are the ones that are behind the curtain there. And then you have the ones that other people pick that you don't pick, that are the ones that I represented with sunglasses for some reason. I don't remember why. And then down in the other corner, then you have the ones that neither of you picked, and these are the unknown unknowns. So, open secrets, unknown, known knowns, unknown, known unknowns. Got it? It's also used very frequently in creative writing. So if you're trying to determine what the motivations are between, for characters and stuff like that, then people will kind of like put them into this grid, and you can kind of use this as a technique in developing a story. But it gives us a matrix of observability and understanding. Did I lose the signal? No. Okay. It's just down there. So things that are observable are the ones that are being brought into the sunshine. The more that we understand, it's things that are brought into the sunshine. So I'm going to be talking a lot about sunshine today, obviously, because I'm not used to it. It's getting dark in Iceland, seriously. So it can also be thought of in terms of risk assessment. So if you're getting into the lower right quadrant here, you're mining maybe in that area for new ventures, or these are the things that are really, that's where you'll discover new business models or something like this. But as people working with documents, we're trying to move things as much as possible into the sunshine as possible, so that people know what other people know, and there are less known unknowns, and I can get lost saying that every time. So my first task at any new job is to identify people who hold knowledge. And this is David Byrne holding a brain. It's hard to find a picture of somebody holding knowledge. Somebody I thought maybe somebody hunched over a computer and just kind of like holding it to themselves, but I wanted to go with a more positive image, which is what I came up with here. So when I joined companies, and I've been working for quite a few in Iceland over the last 20 years, I usually join at a point when there's a critical need for knowledge to be spread within the company. So you have a lot of growth, a lot of new hires, and then you've probably run into this several times in your own careers where there's maybe 1, 2, 3 people who have like a lot of knowledge that they're holding, and they need to get it as quickly as possible into the heads of other people. And so what the next part of this talk is going to be about is how I've dealt with that. Yeah, yuck, brains. So we can consider these things to be observable. You publish a user manual, you have some functioning software, you have release notes, tutorials, training materials, and stuff like this. But on the other hand, if you're going to be growing a lot and you don't have a big team of people who are working in technical writing, then you do need to kind of like remove the barriers for people to do the work that they need to do. And you don't want to become the bottleneck for these things. So usually on these teams, I've been the only person working in technical writing. So I've had to cope with that. So a little bit about that background that I was talking about. I live in Iceland, which is a country in the North Atlantic Ocean. It has a lot of fish. You can see the fish there. It has maybe some sea monsters. There are some people there who say they believe in elves. Some rock bands that sing in made-up languages. We have volcanoes that spew hot ash into the atmosphere every few years and disrupt air traffic all over Europe. You're welcome. And occasionally our banks collapse and people lose a lot of money. But I see all these things as kind of related to Icelandic, they're not averse to risk, basically. They go into a lot of startups. They'll start something, and if it doesn't work out, you'll see the same people in a different company, several months later. And as a result, I have worked for a lot of these companies and seen a lot of like boom and bust kind of things over the years. I think my last count was about 20 different companies or something like that. I've worked in telecommunications, airline booking systems, fair trade music streaming, spaceship gaming, personal finance management. It's just kind of like all over the place. And yeah, always as a professional communicator, as you can probably tell. But most recently, I've been with a company called Wuxi Nextcode, which is a contract genomics company. And basically, we make software for working with big data, like genomic data, DNA stuff. And it's a database system, query language. It's for sorting and working with phenotype and genotype data. Jargon. So basically, when I started at this job, this was the first time that I'd ever worked in this field. I graduated 1997 with a chemistry degree. It's quite a long time ago. And then since then, I've just been writing manuals for people and doing stuff like this as a day job and working in clubs at night. So I wasn't really aware that there was a thing called bioinformatician in the world. So I'm going to tell you something about bioinformatics. Bioinformatics is like finding a needle in a haystack where every piece of hay looks like a needle, and the needle is cancer. And this may or may not be the right haystack. That's the other thing. And anyone who's had a family member go through the process of doing genetic screening for testing and everything like that, you know how important it is to cut down on discovery time. So basically, what I was tasked with doing was to document the database query language that had been developed in-house. It had been in use for about a decade, parts of it for almost 20 years. And I had to get a lot of information out of the heads of a few people, and preferably into the hands of the people who were actually working with the hospitals or with the pharma companies or working with people who could actually do the discovery, who could work with the genetic data. But using this kind of language that was being developed in-house, and it wasn't very well documented. There was kind of a start of a Sphinx, like a RST document that somebody had been working on, but the last technical writer had left, a year and a half before I got there. And so it was kind of a, situation that you're probably familiar with in some way or another. So I should say something about imposter syndrome at this point, because starting this new job caused me to feel like, oh my God, this is just, I'm totally out of my depth here. And, to a certain degree, every job that I've had to do has been like that, because when you start a new career, like you're not starting a new career, you're a technical writer or you're working in documentation, but you're moving into some other field that you've never done before. So you have to learn a whole new thing. Like I'm not a gamer, so when I started working for a games company, it was very disorienting. Like all the terminology and stuff like that. But with genomics, it was just a whole other level of that, like having never worked in biotech before. But it's actually a little bit liberating to go into a job. So many people experience this. It's something that, all different types of people experience in their jobs. But as a documentarian or as somebody who's writing documents or whatever it is that we're calling ourselves now, it's liberating because you do have that kind of freedom to go into a job and say, well, I need to know what you're doing. I need to learn more about it. You can kind of sidestep that issue of the fact that you don't know it all to begin with, I think. I had a point in putting this here, and it was to lead up to the next quote, because this is something that Einstein said about, understanding and knowledge. But I live by this one, which is fake it till you make it. So how did I deal with this? So it was, I took a few different things that I had learned about in the past. So some of them came from behavioral psychology. Some of them came from a previous career working in journalism. And one thing that has often come up in the past is active listening. You know what active listening is? Right. So basically, you're reflecting what people are saying back to them in order to kind of digest the information and engage with what they're saying. The problem is that you can't really do that if you don't know what what this person is talking about. They're saying a lot of things. Every second word is something that you've never heard before. You have a lot of hurdles there. And it's a little bit like a therapy session, which is why I have a therapy couch here. I'm not suggesting that you become your boss's therapist, but when you're completely in the dark on a subject, it is very difficult to employ active listening. So I wanted to make a very highbrow point about social constructionism at this point. Because in order to kind of like have a holistic kind of view of knowledge, I think it's important to kind of combine with what you know about a subject and what you know that other people know about a subject and what you think they think you know about a subject. Does that make any sense? It made a lot of sense to me last night. I'm just going to put it out there in the universe, and we can talk about it later if you want. But hyperactive listening is actually what I ended up doing. So it basically came down to, do you mind if I record this session? Because what I realized with the guy who was, had so much to tell me was that there was no way I was going to get it down. If I was trying to type anything while I was in these sessions, or to try and do a screen capture on what he was doing or something like that, I knew that I was going to lose a lot of it. So it was just, take the phone out, put it on the, and ask, of course, do you mind if I record this? And I ended up with 8 hours of conversations about this database that I then spent the next 3 months going through to make the documentation. So it gave me a lot to work with, and it didn't necessarily take away from this person's day when I was working with them. But yeah, it's very important to ask first, of course, before you record people. Not that I've done the opposite. Anyway. So that was very useful. Another point that I've come to understand is about tools. So when I've been in conferences here or other ones, I hear people talking a lot about what tools to use. What tool are we going to be able to solve this problem? Like, how can I find a tool that does everything and everything like that? So the point that I wanted to make here was that at some point, I think it was about 8 years ago, I just gave up. I was like, okay, I'm never going to be able to stop this project manager from using Word. These people over here love Confluence, but our American team just uses SharePoint, and I give up. There's nothing, I'm going to be like, there's no workflow that you're going to be able to kind of like piece this together. And I've decided that that's fine, because if you have an ecosystem where people feel comfortable contributing, you're not getting in the way of that by forcing them into some sort of thing. But it does mean that I got into the role of workflow design a lot more. And most recently, I took that kind of seed of the restructured text and like built that into all of the documentation that we ended up doing for the all the products. And that was kind of nice, because that put a lot of the programmers really liked that system. Like, it was sitting with the code and they could contribute it, whatever, and everything else. Yeah. But this picture of a butterfly, I'm not sure how this ended up in here. I think I just really wanted to draw a butterfly. The other point that I wanted to make, and I was talking about this a lot when I first arrived here with a group of people, and I decided to add it in at the last minute, is about constructing monuments to knowledge. So what I mean about this is that, or the question that I wanted to answer was because there were so many people who were coming to me or talking about in some conversations about how do you get people to trust you? How do you get them to give you this information? And of course, the people who are creating things, usually I don't find that they are really averse to having their stuff documented, but they're really worried about spending a lot of time on it, and also very concerned about not having the skill set to do it, that they aren't great communicators or they aren't able to do this. So what I found was really useful was to think of pockets of knowledge that you were collecting together as a kind of a road marker or something like this, like we have in Iceland, where they stack the stones up so that you can see the next point where you're going to be walking when you're hiking. It's the trust issues kind of disappear at that point, or if you have the steep learning curve or whatever else, then it helps to create these monuments to your organizational knowledge. So some examples of this would be like, if people are coming into the company and the onboarding is really difficult, if they're all coming away and they're saying, this genomic stuff is really out of my league, what I was noticing happening was people were kind of reverting to a kind of a form of their job. Like, the QA people were becoming just purely QA people. They weren't thinking about any kind of like holistic thing having to do with the programs at all, or the users, because they didn't understand the users and all this type of thing. So what I immediately did was started a glossary which was terms that you could find anywhere, but it was like terms that kept coming up in the office. And it was this imposter thing, again, just kind of acknowledging the fact that we didn't know what people were talking about and just creating a list. And it turned out that there were so many people in the company who really needed this help. So we jumped that hurdle and we can move on to the next one. So where I got lost last night was where I was I was thinking about social constructionism, and then I realized that I was also talking about social constructivism, where we're kind of socially within an organization, we're working together to build these artifacts. So interestingly, this is a picture of, well, you see this kind of like Nordic statues that are around Iceland. This is the Sculptors House, which is like up on the hill right in the middle of the downtown. And you don't even see it anymore. But I find it really interesting that at some point in history of the city, there was this huge Dracula's castle right on the top of the hill. And then the city just kind of like grew around it. But these things are related. I'm gonna leave it to the crowd to kind of wade through that. Sunshine. So this is what I wanted to say is that we are always trying to bring knowledge into the sunshine. And our current situation, what happened basically with the outcome of having the Sphinx documentation and more contributions from the programmers, is that we ended up bringing the products themselves closer to the documentation. So now everybody's contributing to the documentation in the form of these Jupyter notebooks where we have running examples within the notebooks, and that has kind of transformed the way that we're working, because we're not focused so much on maintaining software that, you know, has been in development for 20 years. It's more that we're trying to put small tools in the hands of the people who are actually going to be doing the discovery. So they say, oh, well, how am I going to build this cohort from UK Biobank data to find out about diabetes? And then we can just write the queries in the background, make a nice document that runs all at once, and say, here, this will do it for you. And that was key, because, of course, when you want to start writing some new documentation, you're always thinking about who your audience is. But if you're translating from computer scientist to geneticist, unless you're, you know, somehow a marriage of those two fields, it's going to be very difficult. So what we ended up doing was that we listened to what they were wanting. They wanted the tools to make the documentation, basically. I mean, you're making reports, you're digging into things, it's making scientific papers. And then it translated into, okay, we have these notebooks now, we can make these little things and kind of combine these into bigger projects. And there you have it. So, dun, dun, dun. Thank you.